In the winter of 2009, a team of archaeologists investigating a collapsed limestone outcrop in the Pyrenees Mountains of northern Spain noticed something unusual. The rockfall wasn't natural. The stones were stacked, deliberately, precisely, blocking the entrance to a cave that hadn't been opened in over 27,000 years. It took 3 weeks to carefully dismantle the seal, and when they finally broke through into the darkness beyond, they found 18 people, men, women, children, arranged in 3 concentric circles around the remains of a central fire pit. No signs of violence, no evidence of struggle, no indication that anyone had tried to leave, just bodies, positioned with care, hands placed deliberately, faces turned inward, and on every wall surrounding them, carved deep into the limestone, the same symbol repeated hundreds of times, a spiral, descending, like water draining into darkness. The entrance had been sealed from the inside, and every person in that cave had chosen to stay. This is the story of 18 people who walked into stone and never walked out. 27,000 years ago, the Pyrenees Mountains formed a natural corridor between what is now France and Spain. The region was cold but survivable, part of the transition zone between glaciated highlands and temperate lowlands. This was territory occupied by late Gravettian populations, anatomically modern humans who had developed sophisticated survival strategies for Ice Age Europe. They hunted reindeer, ibex, and wild horses. They built semi-permanent shelters from wood and hide. They created intricate tools from bone, antler, and stone. And they understood ritual. Gravettian people are known for their symbolic behavior. They carved figurines. They buried their dead with ceremony. They painted and engraved deep inside caves, images of animals, abstract patterns, human hands. But they also understood isolation. Caves in this region weren't just shelters, they were thresholds, places where the physical world met something else, entrances to the earth, passages to ancestors, spaces where sound, darkness, and cold created altered states of consciousness. Most caves showed evidence of temporary occupation, fires near entrances, tool-making debris, animal bones from meals. But some caves were different. Some caves were sealed. Archaeologists had found blocked cave entrances before, usually small openings closed with a few stones to protect cached supplies or mark burial sites. But never anything like this. Never a cave sealed so completely. Never with so many people inside. And never with evidence suggesting they had sealed it themselves, from the inside, knowing they would never leave. The cave, designated as Cueva del Silencio by the research team, extended roughly 30 meters into the mountainside before opening into a circular chamber approximately 15 meters in diameter. Dr. Iñaki Mendoza, the lead archaeologist, immediately noticed the deliberate arrangement of the space. The 18 individuals weren't scattered. They weren't piled. They were positioned. 3 circles. The outer circle contained 9 bodies. The middle circle held 6. The innermost circle, closest to the central fire pit, contained 3. All were facing inward, toward the fire. But here's what made Dr. Mendoza pause. Their postures were too composed, too intentional. Most were sitting upright, even after 27,000 years of skeletal collapse. Some had their hands resting on their knees. Others had hands folded in their laps. 2 of the children in the outer circle appeared to have been placed with their heads resting against adult shoulders. There was no panic in these positions, no contortion, no signs that anyone had changed their mind. And then there was the fire. The central pit contained charred wood, ash, and carbonized plant material. But the distribution was strange. The fire had burned hot enough to crack stones placed around its perimeter. But it had burned out completely. No one had fed it. No one had maintained it. The 18 people had gathered around a fire, arranged themselves in circles, and then let it die. Dr. Mendoza's initial field notes described the scene with one word: voluntary. But voluntary what? What would cause 18 people to seal themselves inside a cave and wait in the dark? Over the next 2 years, Dr. Mendoza's team conducted exhaustive analysis of the remains and the cave environment. What they uncovered was both methodical and deeply unsettling. First, the demographics. The 18 individuals ranged in age from approximately 4 years old to over 60. Isotope analysis revealed they had all lived in the same region, within 30 kilometers of the cave. They weren't strangers. They were likely from the same extended family group or small tribe. Second, the health status. None of the skeletons showed signs of disease, malnutrition, or recent injury. They had been healthy when they entered the cave. Whatever drove them inside wasn't illness or weakness. Third, the seal. When structural engineers examined the entrance blockage, they confirmed what Dr. Mendoza had suspected. The stones had been placed from inside the cave, not outside. Large limestone blocks, some weighing over 50 kilograms, had been stacked in an overlapping pattern that would have been impossible to create from the exterior. Someone inside had built that wall, deliberately, permanently. Fourth, the timeline. Radiocarbon dating placed the event between 26 and 28,000 years ago. But here's what made it more precise. Analysis of the ash and charcoal suggested the fire had burned for approximately 6 to 8 hours before extinguishing, meaning the group had been alive, together, in the cave for at least that long, sitting in circles, feeding a fire, and then stopping. Fifth, the symbols. The descending spiral carved into the walls appeared 247 times throughout the chamber. Always the same size, always the same depth, always the same clockwise rotation. Dr. Mendoza brought in a specialist in Paleolithic iconography, Dr. Hélène Rousseau, from the University of Toulouse. Her analysis revealed something extraordinary. The spirals weren't random. They formed a deliberate pattern, concentrating most densely near the cave entrance and gradually diminishing toward the back, as if marking a path or counting something. And on the wall directly behind the innermost circle, where the 3 bodies sat closest to the fire, someone had carved something else, a single handprint, small, child-sized. In 2011, Dr. Rousseau made a discovery that changed the entire interpretation of the site. While documenting the spirals using high-resolution photography, she noticed faint pigment traces around several of the carvings. Using spectroscopic analysis, she identified the substance, red ochre mixed with animal fat, a common Paleolithic paint medium. But the ochre wasn't decorative. It had been applied after the spirals were carved, as if marking them, activating them. And when she analyzed the distribution of ochre throughout the cave, a pattern emerged. The spirals near the entrance had no pigment. The spirals in the middle section had light traces, but the spirals closest to the bodies, especially those near the innermost circle, were heavily marked, thickly painted, as if the painting had happened over time, progressively. While the group was inside, Dr. Rousseau then examined the floor sediment around each body using micromorphology. What she found was impossible to ignore. Traces of pollen, not from plants that grew outside the cave, but from plants used in Paleolithic contexts for their psychoactive properties. Species related to modern henbane and certain fungi. Ethnobotanists confirmed that similar plants appear in shamanic traditions across Eurasia, used to induce trance states, visions, and altered consciousness. The 18 people hadn't just entered the cave. They had prepared for something. And then came the final detail. When forensic analysts examined the skeletal remains more closely, they found something subtle but significant. The position of the jaw bones and hyoid structures in several individuals suggested they had died with their mouths open. Not from screaming, not from suffocation, from singing or chanting. Dr. Rousseau's report included this line: "The physical evidence suggests a prolonged ritual involving fire, repetitive vocalization, and possible ingestion of psychoactive substances. The sealing of the cave appears to have been the final act, not an accident, not a punishment, but a deliberate conclusion. The 18 people had gathered in that cave knowing they wouldn't leave. They had sealed the entrance themselves, and they had stayed together until the fire went out, until the darkness was complete. Since the discovery, researchers have proposed several theories to explain why 18 people from the same community would voluntarily seal themselves inside a cave and remain until death. None provide a complete answer, but together they reveal just how complex and how mysterious Ice Age belief systems may have been. Theory 1. Collective ritual suicide during crisis. Some anthropologists believe the group entered the cave in response to an external crisis, possibly famine, disease, or the collapse of their community. Rather than face slow starvation or watch children suffer, they chose a controlled, ritualized death together. The careful arrangement, the symbolic preparation, and the inclusion of entire families support this theory. Ethnographic parallels exist in cultures facing extinction, where communal death becomes a way to maintain dignity and unity. What it explains: the deliberate sealing, the presence of all age groups, the calm positioning of bodies. What it doesn't explain: why they brought psychoactive plants, why they spent hours painting spirals, and why, if this was desperation, they invested so much effort into ritual rather than survival. Theory 2. Shamanic journey to the other world. Dr. Rousseau and several ethnographers specializing in circumpolar shamanism have proposed that the group was attempting a collective spiritual crossing, a guided journey into what they believed was the realm of ancestors or spirits. In many indigenous traditions, caves represent portals. Darkness, isolation, and altered states induced by plants or sensory deprivation were seen as ways to cross thresholds between worlds. The spirals, symbols of descent and transformation, combined with evidence of psychoactive substances and prolonged vocalization, all support this. What it explains: the ritual preparation, the symbolic markers, the voluntary nature of the event, the fire as a central anchor point. What it doesn't explain: why no one attempted to leave, why children were included, and why, if this was a spiritual journey, their bodies remained. In most shamanic traditions, practitioners are expected to return. Theory 3. Epidemic quarantine and sacrificial isolation. A more clinical theory suggests the group may have been infected with a contagious disease and chose to isolate themselves to protect the wider community. The sealing of the cave would prevent anyone from entering and becoming infected. The ritual elements, fire, symbols, psychoactive plants, could represent attempts to spiritually cleanse or prepare for death while serving a practical epidemiological function. What it explains: the sealing from inside, the inclusion of multiple generations, suggesting family units, the deliberate choice to stay. What it doesn't explain: why there are no skeletal markers of disease, why they would spend time carving hundreds of spirals, and why, if they were sick, they appeared healthy enough to arrange themselves so carefully. Theory 4. Initiation ritual gone wrong. The darkest theory, though least supported, is that this was intended as a temporary initiation or vision quest that went catastrophically wrong. Perhaps the entrance seal was supposed to be temporary. Perhaps they miscalculated oxygen levels or the effect of the psychoactive plants. The child's handprint near the innermost circle could represent a young initiate. The progressive painting of spirals could mark stages of the ritual. What it explains: the ritual elements, the preparation, the use of plants. What it doesn't explain: why experienced adults would make such a fatal error, why the entrance seal was so permanent, and why the bodies show no signs of panic or attempts to escape. The truth is, we may never know what they believed they were doing, but the evidence is clear. They chose this. All 18 of them, together. Here's what we know for certain. 27,000 years ago, 18 people entered a cave in the Pyrenees Mountains. They were healthy. They were local. They were families, grandparents, parents, children. They brought fire. They brought tools. They brought plants that altered consciousness. And they brought stones. They arranged themselves in 3 circles around a central fire. They carved spirals into the walls, 247 of them. They painted them with ochre. They sang or chanted for hours while the fire burned. And then, at some point, they sealed the entrance from the inside. They stacked 50-kilogram stones into a wall that would take 27,000 years to breach. And they stayed. They didn't panic. They didn't fight. They didn't try to escape. They sat in their circles. They faced the fire. And when it went out, they remained in the darkness until there was nothing left but bones and symbols and silence. We don't know if they were running from something or running towards something. We don't know if this was despair or devotion, fear or faith. What we do know is that it was intentional. Every carved spiral, every positioned body, every stone in that seal. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. And whatever they believed waited for them in that darkness, whatever they thought would happen when the fire went out and the world beyond the stone disappeared, it was powerful enough to convince 18 people, including children, to stay. The cave is sealed again now, protected as an archaeological site, but the spirals remain on the walls, descending, turning inward, leading somewhere we cannot follow. And 18 people, whose names we will never know, are still there, waiting in the dark for something we may never understand. If this story unsettled you, you're not alone. Cueva del Silencio remains one of the most haunting discoveries in Ice Age archaeology, and it raises a question that's impossible to ignore. What could 18 people have believed so deeply that they chose to seal themselves in stone? If you want to explore more mysteries like this, rituals we can witness but not understand, symbols we can see but not decode, subscribe to the channel. Every week, we descend deeper into prehistory. Leave a comment with your theory. What do you think happened in that cave? And if this story stayed with you, hit the like button. It helps more people discover these buried mysteries. Every stone remembers a story. This one remembers 18 people who chose the dark. See you in the next mystery.